Sit back, relax, and get comfortable because today we're going to be talking about what some people call the most comfortable backpacking sleeping pad on the market. Welcome to the Droo review. I am Drew, and today we're going to be looking at the Big Agnes Q-Core SLX. Full disclosure, this pad's actually no longer on the market, but it is very similar to the current pads that Big Agnes is offering. So I think it's really important to look at it anyway, and there's a lot of Big Agnes features that you'll get on the other pads that you'll find are the same on this one. We have the regular wide edition. It's 25 inches by 72 inches. And really thick. And some people do think this is the most comfortable, compact, lightweight backpacking pad there is. It weighs approximately 20 ounces and it has an R value of 3.5. And unlike certain other companies, Climate, this is verified and they're not lying about their R value. The MSRP on this is approximately $200, with smaller models going for more like $150. Right now, the closest thing they sell to this is the Q-Core Deluxe, and the MSRP on the different models of that pad are almost exactly the same. It's worth noting that the new model Big Agnes claims has been totally redesigned from the ground up, and it boasts a higher R value, but to the naked eye they really do look the same. Alright, let's take a look at what you get when you actually receive a Big Agnes pad. So the first things first, you get the pad, and then you get a labeled stuff sack for the pad. And this is actually pretty nice because if you're anything like me and you're disorganized, it's really nice to just be able to look at a glance and see Big Agnes Q-Core SLX and then the size of the pad, instead of having to open the bag up and look and try and see exactly what you have in there. And then you also get another bag, and this is, and I quote, the upcycled inflation sack. And you also get a little repair kit. It's not much, but it should be able to help with any emergency repairs you need to make while you're out camping. At first, I thought the inflation sack was dumb, but now I actually understand it a little better, and we'll get more into that later. Alright, now we're going to talk about setting it up, taking it down, and all that good stuff. So the first things first, it's a blow-up pad. So the setup's basically unpack, unroll, and then inflate. Super easy. But in my opinion, this is where Big Agnes really shines over some other pads I've used. The valve is great. It's got two valves built into one little apparatus. One is the big valve for inflation and the other is the small one for deflation, and they're labeled as such. The inflation valve has a little one-way rubber gasket thing that's pretty typical of other pads, but it's actually more clever than that. The valve's actually quite wide, and what this does is it allows a lot more airflow to go through. And it doesn't seem like a big deal, but compared to my Climate pad with the extremely narrow valve, this makes a huge difference in blowing it up. And this is a high volume pad, so you need to force a lot of air through there. With the RAF pump, I found that the Climate pad with, I would guess, double as much air volume, took just over half as many pumps to get inflated than my Climate did. So that's looking at 3 to 4 times more efficient. The other clever part is that little rubber gasket. The way it's built makes it really easy to deflate little bits of air at a time and really fine-tune exactly how much air pressure there is in the pad. And Climate and other companies take note, the valves are on top of the sleeping pad, so it's really easy to adjust the inflation or just inflate them while the pad is actually in its proper position. The deflate valve is literally just an opening. It seals shut and then you open it and air rushes out. It's super simple. There's no sort of flippy mechanism. It's just a really simple, easy to use valve. I did, however, have one issue with this, and I've heard of other people having the same issue. Because it seals pretty tight and it keeps all the air in the pad, it's quite difficult to get exactly in the right position. And one night when I first used it, I didn't get it quite aligned right, and the pad did slowly leak air all night. And the pad ended up being mostly flat in a couple of hours. I don't think this is really a huge design flaw, rather user error, but it is something that users definitely should be aware of and make sure they get that valve totally sealed. So as I mentioned before, I woke up in the middle of the night with the pad pretty much deflated. Now I did have to blow it up with my mouth, And this was a bit cumbersome as the pad is really high volume, so it takes a lot of blows. But it was made a little bit easier because the valve was on top. I normally opt to use a raft pump, which is by far the best way to do this, but if you have an electric blower, that will work too. Or if you want to use your mouth, you're more than welcome to, but it is a bit difficult. And that's where the inflation sack comes in. All right, let's talk sack. Initially, I thought it was kind of dumb, gimmicky, but I actually was pretty impressed by it. Don't get me wrong, it's no game changer, but it certainly adds some value to the pad. To use the sack, you snap it right into the inflation port. It fits just like the cap does. And then the idea is you fill the bag with air, close it off, and then force that air into the sleeping pad. Initially, I struggled to do this very well, but I definitely discovered a few techniques and tricks that'll make it way easier for you. So first, I found it was a lot better not to grab the little handles built in. They're really tempting to grab. I mean, that's why they're there. But when I grabbed the edges, I felt I could close the bag quicker and not lose as much air. The next thing is to gently blow inside the bag. With your mouth a foot away or so, you can just do a gentle blow, and that just really helps fill it, and it's not very straining on you. And the final thing is when you close it, you just want to be really, really quick. The quicker you are, the more air you'll trap in there, and then the more will go into the pad. It's not terribly quick, and when I tested it, I was always slower than blowing up with my mouth. I'm gonna compile a spreadsheet of all the different pads we end up testing and how long it takes to blow them up. And I will put the times up here compared to the klymaloft, which is the only other one we've done at this point. It does keep you from getting lightheaded, and it's really pretty low effort to use the bag. Deflation and packing up is a breeze. You literally just open the valve, and then I like to wait a little bit, fold, roll, and it was ready to go. I never had an issue getting the pad back in the stuff sack, which for me is huge. It seems so common that outdoor brands put a tiny stuff sack that's just unrealistic to be able to get it back into every time. Big Agnes gave you a little extra room, and then you can fit the pad in no problem. And that's just super nice to me because you don't always get a perfect roll. And sometimes you're in a hurry and you don't want to deal with just having to stuff it as hard as you can into this tiny little sack. I also never really had any issues with air getting trapped in the pad. They were easy enough to just kind of smooth out and push the air out, and it rolled up tight. To me, comfort is king, and everything else is an afterthought. So with that in mind, how does the Q-Core SLX stack up? Well, as I noted before, it's very thick, and that adds a pretty high level of comfort. In fact, on the edges when it's inflated, it's nearly 4 3/4 of an inch thick. And then in the middle, it's about 3.75 inches thick, making it pretty much the thickest sleeping pad I've ever found. But the key takeaway here is that the middle and the sides are different thicknesses. And what that does is it kind of adds a little rim on the edges, which keeps you in the middle of the pad. And someone like me who kind of moves when they sleep, this is a really nice feature. It also really helps if you're on a little bit of a slant or a hill. It just sort of helps you not roll off the pad. This is a feature I'd really like to see on other inflatable pads, as it doesn't seem like it would be terribly hard to implement, but hey, what do I know about making sleeping pads? All right, the next thing to talk about is the material. So they call it rip-stop nylon, and I don't know how great it is at stopping rips or how durable it is. Some online things claim it's heavier and better than some other materials. I'm not gonna vouch for that because I don't know. I personally haven't had any problem with the durability of the material, but there are two things I don't like about it. Number one, it's loud, and number two, it's slippery. So first, let's talk loudness. Just the sleeping pad rubbing on the top of it makes that it's a sound I bet you can all imagine. It's not horrible, but if you're a really light sleeper, then you could possibly wake yourself up just moving around. For me, it's not an issue, but I can see how it would be for some people. Now the other one is a lot more of an issue for me, and that is that it's slippery. And I move around a lot when I sleep, and with the pad top and my sleeping bag just being slippery, I found I was kind of sliding off this thing a lot. And that was a bit of a bummer, and it just seems like it's not an issue that they need to have. I think it was a climate pad I saw, and it had a really grippy surface, and that was amazing because then you aren't slipping off, but whatever. One thing to note, if you do use the Big Agnes sleep system, then you're obviously not going to slip off the pad. Now, I don't use that system, and I know a lot of people don't. So I wish they would just kind of consider that when designing their pads. The pad itself has the typical I-beam construction that you see in most of these pads, and that just keeps any parts from getting more air pressure than the rest and keeping you more stable on it and more comfortable. It has these little dog bone creases here, which I guess are part of that I-beam construction. I honestly don't really know how this works, but it seems to work pretty well. I did the jiggle test where I just kind of jiggle around and I feel what it does, and there's definitely some feedback, and I definitely kept jiggling a little longer than I would have liked. On the klymaloft with the foam on the top, I don't get nearly as much jiggle, which for me is a pretty big factor in comfort. I do think I'm hypersensitive to this because I know I can sometimes feel my heartbeat jiggle the pad when I'm laying down on one. Anyway, it's something I thought I'd mention because maybe it bugs you too, and maybe it doesn't. So honestly, this is a comfortable pad, and I don't want to say it's not, but I thought it was going to be more comfortable. Just a few factors like the slipperiness and the jiggle kind of made it a deal breaker for me personally. Now, if you have the sleep system and maybe you don't mind the jiggliness, then this thing is pretty awesome. Those little rims that keep you centered in the pad are amazing, and it is a really great pad. But personally, I prefer my klymaloft, and my klymaloft is actually thinner. But I think that foam layer is just more comfortable, and I just didn't get that jiggle. Of course, with the klymaloft, you're sacrificing weight and space because that foam makes it a lot heavier, and it also makes it roll up a lot less tight. I don't want to undersell it. I'm just saying my experience, I like the klymaloft a little better. Alright, before we close it out, let's talk issues. Now, there is that valve issue I mentioned earlier, and I don't think this is a huge deal, but I do think it's something that needs to be talked about, and just that the user is really aware of this issue because it can be mitigated with just proper closure every night. A bigger issue is a coworker of mine had the same pad and he had it fail catastrophically. On these rows with the dog bones, he had 6 of them blow out all at once. So it wasn't holding air at all, like totally flat. He's really lucky he had a cot on that trip because otherwise that would have been 3 probably pretty sleepless nights of sleeping on the ground. But thankfully he had his cot, so it was all good. And just to be clear, there was no hope of field repair for this thing. We looked at it, it was way too big a blowout. Now Big Agnes is a company that stands by their products, and he submitted a warranty claim and they replaced it free of charge. But you know, that doesn't work when you still have 3 more nights to sleep on your blown out pad. So just something to consider, and maybe with their new redesigned pad, that's not an issue anymore, but just something worth noting. In conclusion, this is a great sleeping pad. It's really thoughtful design. The valve is incredible. The little side rails are amazing innovation that I absolutely love and wish there were more of on other sleeping pads. And it's made by a company with a great reputation and first-rate service. It is a little bit pricey, and it is definitely on the higher end of sleeping pads. But what you pay for, you get really great insulation, you get a pretty damn comfortable pad, and you get the warranty service of a really trusted company. Personally, I'm still going to be using my klymaloft just because I find it a little more comfortable, and the space as well as the weight is not really a big deal for me. The klymaloft has those valve issues that just continue to plague me and piss me off, but I'm willing to deal with it because I get a better night's sleep on the klymaloft. This is definitely the right pad for some people. It's not the right pad for me, but will it be the right pad for you? Thank you for watching. This has been a Droo review on the channel Droo. Give it a subscribe if you want to see more gear reviews like this, and I have some really big news, but I can't tell you guys about it yet. So again, thanks for watching.